Hey, what's up, my little crime freaks, and welcome back to another episode of Mostly Crime with My, a podcast where you and I get together to discuss all things creepy, sneaky, and downright freaky. If you are new here, welcome. If you are not new here, welcome. I'm so happy to have each and every one of you here. This week, I was trying to think about what kind of story I wanted to cover because a lot of you said you wanted to kind of put a pause on true crime and take a deep dive into something a little more creepy, maybe a little more paranormal, something within that realm. And for whatever reason, a very particular story popped up in my mind. Not something I've seen on TV, not something you've read in a book or anything like that, but in particular, a story that a friend told me. It was 2015 at around 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, and I got a phone call. The phone call was from one of my friends, and he had just read a Reddit story online. And this story spooked him so bad that he had to share it with somebody else. So for whatever reason, he chose me. And to this day, I thank him because I have never slept the same. I have never been able to walk in a dimly lit area the same. I have never been able to sleep with all the lights off since. And quite frankly, it's just something that I had nightmares about for ages. So if you're easily spooked, then I don't know that this video is for you. But if you're on this channel, then the chances are you're not easily spooked. So I would love to share this story with you. And if you are not scared shitless by the end of this podcast, then you have certainly intrigued me. So please, I invite you specifically to leave a link to your favorite story in the comments below that scares the bejeebies out of you, and I would be more than happy to share it with our followers because I have yet in the last 8 years to come across a story that spooked me as much as this one. But yeah, if you have come across a story that is scarier than these, then by all means, we are welcome to hear them. So buckle in, get ready, and I would say purchase a new nightlight before you listen and press play to this podcast because I really don't think you're ready. So the first story is by a user called 1,000 Vultures, and it was posted in October of 2011 under the NOSLEEP forum, and the story is called Footsteps. It's a pretty long one, but I promise you, in the end, it is well worth the ride. This is a long story, so I apologize for that. I've never had to tell this story with enough detail to actually explain it all the way, but it is true, and it happened when I was about 6 years old. In a quiet room, if you press your ear against a pillow, you can hear your heartbeat. As a kid, the muffled, rhythmic beats sounded like soft footsteps on a carpeted floor. And so, as a kid, almost every night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I would hear these footsteps, and I would be ripped back to consciousness, terrified. For my entire childhood, I lived with my mother in a fairly nice neighborhood that was in a transitional phase. People of lower economic means were gradually moving in, and my mother and I were two of these people. We lived in the kind of house you see being transported in two pieces on the interstate, but my mom took good care of it. There were a lot of woods surrounding that neighborhood that I would play in and explore during the day, but at night, as things often do to a kid, they took a more sinister feeling. This, coupled with the fact that, due to the nature of our house, there was a fairly large crawl space underneath, filled my mind with imaginary monsters and inescapable scenarios which would consume my thoughts when I was awoken by the footsteps. I told my mom about the footsteps, and she said I was just imagining things. Despite all the creepiness and footsteps, the only weird thing that ever happened was that every now and then I would wake up on the bottom bunk, despite having gone to sleep on the top. But this wasn't really weird since I'd sometimes get up to piss or get something to drink and couldn't remember just going back to sleep on the bottom bunk. I am an only child, so it really didn't matter. This would happen once or twice a week, but waking up on the bottom bunk wasn't too terrifying. But one night, I didn't wake up on the bottom bunk. I had heard the footsteps but was too far gone to be woken up by them. And when I was awoken, it wasn't from the sound of the footsteps or a nightmare, but because I was cold. Really cold. When I opened my eyes, I saw stars. I was in the woods. I sat up immediately and tried to figure out what was going on. I thought I was dreaming, but that didn't seem right, though neither did me being in the woods. There was a deflated pool float right in front of me, one of those ones shaped like a shark. This only added to the surreal feeling, but after a while it seemed like I just wasn't going to wake up because I wasn't asleep. I stood up to orient myself, but I didn't recognize these woods. I played in the woods by my house all the time, and so I knew them really well, but if these weren't the same woods, then how could I get out? I took a step and felt a shooting pain in my foot, which knocked me back to where I had just been laying. I had stepped on a thorn. By the light of the moon, I could see that they were everywhere. I looked at my other foot, but it was fine, and as a matter of fact, so was the rest of me. I didn't have another scratch on me, and I wasn't even that dirty. I cried for a little bit and then stood back up. I didn't know which way to go, so I just picked a direction. I resisted the urge to call out since I wasn't sure I wanted to be found by who or what might be out there. I walked for what seemed like hours. I tried to walk in a straight line and tried to course correct when I had to take detours, but I was a kid and I was too afraid. There weren't any howls or screams, and only once did I hear a noise that scared me. It sounded like a crying baby, and I think now that it was just a cat, but I panicked. I ran veering in different directions and tried to avoid big thicks of bushes and collapsed trees. And I was paying close attention to where I stepped because by that point my feet were in pretty bad shape. I paid too much attention to where I was stepping and not enough to where those steps were leading because not long after hearing the cry, I saw something that filled me with the kind of despair I haven't experienced since. It was the pool float. I was only 10 feet from where I had woken up. This wasn't magic or some supernatural space bending. I was lost. Up until that moment, I thought more about getting out of the woods than how I got in, but being back at the beginning just caused my mind to swim. I wasn't even sure that these were my woods. I had only been hoping that they were. Had I run a huge circle around that spot, or did I just get turned around and start making my own way back? How was I going to get out? At the time, I thought the North Star was just the brightest star, and so I looked and found the biggest one and followed it. Eventually, things started to look more familiar, and when I saw the ditch, a dirt ditch my friends and I would have dirt car wars in, I knew I had made it out. By that point, I was walking really slowly because my feet hurt so much, but I was so happy to be close to home that I broke into a light jog. When I actually saw the roof of my house over a neighboring lower set house, I let out a light sob and ran faster. I just wanted to be home. I had already decided that I wouldn't say anything because I had no idea what I could possibly say. I would get back in the house somehow, clean up, and get in bed. My heart sunk as I rounded the corner and my house came fully into view. Every light in the house was on. I knew my mom was up, and I knew I would have to explain or try to explain where I had been, and I couldn't even figure out where to start. My run became a jog, which became a walk. I saw her silhouette through the blinds, and although I was worried about how to explain things to her that didn't matter to me at that point, I walked up a couple of steps to the porch and put my hand on the doorknob and turned. Right before I pushed it open, 2 arms wrapped around me and pulled me back. I screamed as loud as I could, "Mom, help! Help me, please, Mom!" The feeling of being so close to being safe and then being physically pulled away from it filled me with that kind of dread that is, even after all these years, indescribable. The door I had been torn away from opened and a flash of hope shot through my heart. But it wasn't my mom. It was a man, and he was enormous. I thrashed around and kicked at the shins of the person holding me while also trying to get away from the person who had just come out of my house. I was so scared, but I was furious. "Let me go! Where is she? Where's my mom, and what did you do to her?" As my throat stung from screaming, I was drawing in another breath. I became aware of a sound that had been present for longer than I had perceived it. "Honey, please calm down, I've got you." It sounded like my mom. The arms loosened and set me down, and as a man approaching me blocked out the porch light with his head, I noticed his clothes. He was a cop. I turned to the face with the voice behind me and saw it was really my mom. Everything was okay. I began to cry, and the 3 of us went inside. "I'm so glad you're home, sweetie. I was worried I'd never see you again." By that point, she was crying too. "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I just wanted to come home. I'm sorry." "It's okay. Just don't ever do it again. I'm not sure me or my shins could take it." A little laughter broke into my sobs, and I smiled a bit. "Well, I'm sorry for kicking you, but why did you have to grab me like that?" "I was just afraid you'd run away again." I was so confused. "What do you mean?" "Found your note on the pillow," she said, and pointed to a piece of paper that the police officer was sliding across the table. I picked up the note and read it. It was a running away letter. It said that I was unhappy and never wanted to see her or any of my friends again. The police officer exchanged a few words with my mom on the porch while I stared at the letter. I didn't even remember writing the letter. I didn't remember anything about any of this. But even if I sometimes went to the bathroom at night and didn't remember, or even if I could have gone into the woods on my own, even if all of that could have been true, the only thing I knew at this point was, this isn't how you spell my name. I didn't write this letter. User ends that particular story there, but the saga goes on. He says, a couple of days ago I posted a story called Footsteps. There were a number of questions that made me curious about certain details about my childhood, so I spoke with my mother. Exacerbated by my questions, she said, why don't you just tell them about the goddamn balloons if they're so interested? And as soon as she said that, I remembered so much about my childhood that I had forgotten. This story will provide greater context for the previous story, which I think you should have read first, though the order is not of vital importance. Reading that story first will put you in my place more effectively since I remembered the events of Footsteps first. When I was 5 years old, I went to an elementary school that, from what I've come to understand, was a really adamant place about the importance of learning through activity. It was a part of a new program designed to allow children to rise at their own pace. And to facilitate this, the school encouraged teachers to come up with really inventive lesson plans. Each teacher was given the latitude to create his or her own themes which would run for the duration of the grade. And all the lessons in math, reading, etc. would be designed in the spirit of a theme. These themes were called groups. There was a space group, a sea group, an earth group, and the group I was in was called community. In kindergarten, in this country, you don't learn much except how to tie your shoes and how to share, so most of it isn't very memorable. I only remember 2 things very clearly. One, I was the best at writing my name in the right way, and the balloon project, which was really the hallmark of the community group since it was a pretty clever way to show how a community functioned at a really basic level. You've probably heard of this activity. On one Friday, I remember it being Friday because I was really excited about the project and it being the end of the week. Toward the beginning of the year, we walked into the classroom in the morning and saw that there was a fully inflated balloon tied off with a string taped to each of our desks. Sitting on each of our desks was a marker, a pen, a piece of paper, and an envelope. The project was to write a note on the paper, put it in an envelope, and attach it to the balloon, which we could draw a picture on if we wanted. Most of the kids started fighting over the balloons because they wanted different colors, but I started on my note, which I had thought a lot about. All of the notes had to follow a loose structure, but we were allowed to be creative within those boundaries. My note was something like this. Hi, you found my balloon. My name is name, and I attend blank elementary school. You can keep the balloon, but I hope you write me back. I like Mighty Max, exploring, building forts, swimming, and friends. What do you like? Write me back soon. Here's $1 for the mail. On the dollar I wrote, for stamps, right across the front, which my mom said was unnecessary, but I thought it was genius, so I did it. The teacher took a Polaroid of each of us with our balloons and had us put them in the envelope along with our letter. They also included another letter that I assume explained the nature of the project and the sincere appreciation for anyone's participation in writing back and sending photos of their city or neighborhood. This was the whole idea, to build a sense of community without having to leave the school and to establish safe contact with other people. It seemed like such a fun idea. Most came with pictures of different landmarks, and each time a letter would come in, the teacher would pin the picture on a big wall map we had put up showing where the letter had come from and how far the balloon had traveled. It was a really smart idea because I actually looked forward to coming to school to see if we had gotten our letter. For the duration of the year, we had only 1 day a week where we could write back to our pen pal or another student's pen pal in case our letter hadn't come in yet. Mine was one of the last to arrive. When I came into the classroom, I looked at my desk and once again didn't see any letter waiting for me. But as I sat down, the teacher approached me and handed me an envelope. I must have looked so excited because I was about to open it. She put her hand on mine to stop me and said, "Please don't be upset." I didn't understand what she meant. Why would I be upset that my letter had come? Initially, I was mystified that she would even know what was in the envelope, but now I realize that of course the teachers had to screen the contents to make sure there was nothing obscene, but all the same, how could I be disappointed? When I opened the envelope, I understood. There was no letter. The only thing in the envelope was a Polaroid, but I couldn't really make out what it was. It looked like a patch of desert, but it was too blurry to decipher. It appeared as though the camera had been moved while taking the picture. There was no return address, so it couldn't even write back if I wanted to. I was just crushed. The school year passed on, and the letters had stopped coming for nearly all of the other students. After all, you can only continue a written correspondence with a kindergartner for so long. Everyone, including myself, had lost interest in the letters almost completely. But then, I got another envelope. My excitement was rejuvenated, and I was still getting a letter when most of the other pen pals had abandoned their involvement. It made sense that I received another delivery. There had been nothing but a blurry picture in the first one, so this was probably to make up for that. But again, there was no letter, just another picture. This one was more distinguishable, but I still didn't understand it. The photograph was angled way up, catching the top corner of a building, and the rest of the image was destroyed by a lens flare from the sun. Because the balloons didn't travel very far, and because they were all launched on the same day, the board became a bit cluttered, and so the policy for the students still exchanging letters became that they could take the photographs home with them. My best friend Josh had the second highest number of pictures taken home by the end of the year. His pen pal was really cooperative and sent him pictures all around the neighboring city. Josh took home, I think, 4 pictures. I took home nearly 50. The envelopes were all opened by the teacher, but after a while I stopped even looking at the pictures. However, I did save them in one of my drawers that housed my collections of rocks, baseball cards, comic books, and little miniature baseball batting helmets that I'd get out of vending machines at Winn-Dixie after t-ball games. The school year over, my attention turned to other things. Mom had gotten me a small snow cone machine for Christmas that year, and Josh's parents bought him a slightly nicer one for his birthday, which was toward the end of the school year. That summer, we had the idea that we would set up a snow cone stand to make money. We thought we'd make a fortune selling snow cones at $1. Josh lived in a different neighborhood, but we eventually decided that my neighborhood would be better because there were a lot of people who cared for their lawns, the yards in my neighborhood were slightly bigger, etc. We did this for 5 weekends in a row until my mom told us we had to stop, and I've only recently come to understand why she did that. On the 5th weekend, Josh and I were counting our money. Because we had both had a machine, we each had separate stacks of money, and we put it together into one stack and then split it evenly. We had made a total of $16 on that day, and as Josh paid out my $5th, a feeling of profound surprise consumed me. The dollar said, "For stamps." Josh noticed my shock and asked if he had miscounted. I told him about the dollar, and he said, "That's so cool, man." As I thought about it, I came to agree. The idea that the dollar had made it right back to me after changing so many hands floored me. I rushed inside to tell my mom, but my excitement coupled with her being distracted by a phone call made my story incomprehensible, and she responded simply by saying, "Oh wow, that's neat." Frustrated, I ran back outside and told Josh I had something to show him. Back in my room, I opened the drawer and took out a stack of envelopes and showed him some of the pictures. I started with the first picture, and we went through about 10 before Josh lost interest and asked if I wanted to go and play in the ditch, the dirt ditch down the street from my house, before his mom came to pick him up, and so that's what we did. We had a dirt war for a while, but it was interrupted several times by rustling in the woods around us. There were raccoons and stray cats that lived in there, but this was making a little bit too much noise, so we traded guesses at what it was in an attempt to scare each other. My last guess was that it was a mummy, but in the end, Josh kept insisting that it was a robot because of the sounds that we had heard. Before we left, he got a little serious and looked me right in the eyes. "You heard it, didn't you?" It sounded like a robot. You heard it too, right? I had heard it, and since it sounded mechanical, I agreed that it was probably a robot. It's only now that I understand what we heard. When we got back, Josh's mom was waiting for him at the kitchen table with my mom. Josh told his mom about the robot, our moms laughed, and Josh went home. My mom and I ate dinner, and then I went to bed. I didn't stay in bed for very long before I crept out and decided that, due to today's events, I would revisit the envelopes since now the whole affair seemed so much more interesting. I took the first envelope and set it on the floor and set the blurry desert Polaroid on top. I laid the second envelope right next to it and placed the oddly angled Polaroid of a building's top corner on top, and did this with each picture until they formed a grid that was about 5 by 10. I was always taught to be careful with things I was collecting, even if I wasn't sure if they were valuable. I noticed that the pictures gradually became more decipherable. There was a tree with a bird on it, a speed limit sign, a power line, a group of people walking into some building, and then I saw something that vexed me so powerfully that I can now, as I write this, distinctly remember feeling dizzy and capable of only a single repeating thought. Why am I in this picture? In this photograph of the group of people entering the building, I saw myself holding hands with my mother in the very back of a crowd of people. We were at the very edge of the photo, but it was undeniably us. And as my eyes swam over the sea of Polaroids, I became increasingly anxious. It was a really odd feeling. It wasn't fear, it wasn't the feeling you get when you're in trouble. I'm not sure why I was flooded with that feeling, but there I sat, floundering in the distinct sense that I had done something wrong. This feeling only intensified as I looked on at the rest of the photos after the one that had so powerfully struck me. I was in every photo. None of them were close shots. None of them were only of me, but I was in every single one of them. Off to the side, in the back, the bottom of the frame. Some of them only had the tiniest part of my face captured at the very edge of the photo, but nevertheless, I was there. I was always there. I didn't know what to do. Your mind works in funny ways as a kid, but there's a large part of me that was afraid of getting in trouble simply for being up. So since I had already had the looming feeling of having done something wrong, I decided that I should just wait until tomorrow. The next day, my mom was off to work and spent the most of the morning cleaning up around the house. I watched cartoons, I imagine, and waited until I thought it was a good time to show her the Polaroids. When she went out to get the mail, I grabbed a couple of the pictures and put them on the table right in front of me, and I sat waiting for her to come back in. When returned, she already was opening the mail and threw some junk mail on the trash can, and I said, "Mom, can you come here for a second? I have these pictures. Just give me a minute, honey. I need to mark these on the calendar." After a minute or two, she came and stood behind me and asked me what I needed. I could hear her shuffling with the mail behind me, and I just looked at the Polaroids and told her about them. As I explained more and pointed at the pictures, her frequent uh-huhs and okays decreased, and she was suddenly completely quiet and only making a little noise with the mail. The next noise I heard from her sounded as if she was trying to catch her breath in a room that had no air left in it. At last, her struggling gasps were conquered, and she simply dropped the remaining mail on the table and ran into the kitchen to get the phone. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't know about these. Don't be mad at me." With the phone pressed to her ear, she was walking and running back and forth and shouting into it. I nervously fiddled with the mail sitting next to the Polaroids. The top envelope had something sticking out of it that I thoughtlessly and anxiously pulled out until it came out. It was another Polaroid. Confused, I thought that somehow one of my Polaroids had slipped into the stack when she threw the mail down. But when I turned it over and looked at it, I realized I had not seen this one before. To my dismay, it was me. But this one was a much closer shot. I was surrounded by trees and was smiling. But it wasn't just me, I noticed. Josh was there too. This was us. From yesterday. I started yelling for my mom, who was still screaming into the phone. I repeatedly yelled for her until she finally responded with, "What?" And I could only think to ask, "Who are you calling?" "I'm talking with the police, honey." "But why? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do anything." She answered with a response that I never understood until I was forced to revisit these events from the earliest years of my life. She grabbed the envelope off the table, and the picture of Josh and I spun and slid, landing next to the other Polaroids in front of me. She held the envelope up to my eyes, but I could only look at her and watch as all the color began draining out of her face. With tears welling up in her eyes, she said that she had to call the police because there was no postmark. The next story is called Boxes by the same user, and it's a continuation of the first two. For those of you who have read my other stories and asked if there was more and received cryptic answers from me, I want to apologize for being dishonest. I said several times in the comments that nothing really happened after footsteps, but that just isn't true. The events of the following story weren't locked away from the recesses of my mind. I've always remembered them. It was until I remembered balloons and spoke with my mother about the following events that I realized how intertwined this story was with everything else. But I originally really hadn't planned on sharing this anyway. My desire to withhold this memory was due mostly to the fact that I don't think I showed good judgment in it, and I also wanted consent from another person to tell it, so as to not misrepresent what had transpired. I didn't expect there to be a lot of interest in my other stories, so I never really thought I'd get pressed for more details, and I would have been happy to keep this to myself for the rest of my life. I haven't been able to reach the other party, but I would feel disingenuous withholding this story from those who wanted more information, and now that I've spoken with my mother, and another connecting line has been drawn. What follows is as accurate a recollection as I could manage. I apologize for the length. I spent the summer before my first year of elementary school learning how to climb trees. There was one in particular pine tree right outside my house that seemed almost designed for me. It had branches that were so low I could easily grab them without a boost, and for the first couple of days after I learned how to pull myself up, I would just sit on the lowest branch, dangling my feet. The trunk was outside our back fence, and it was easily visible from the kitchen window, which was just above the sink. Before too long, my mother and I developed a routine where I would go play on the tree as she washed the dishes because she could so easily see me as she did other things. As the summer passed, my abilities grew, and before too long, I was climbing fairly high. As the tree got taller, its branches not only got thinner, but more widely spaced, so I eventually reached a point where I couldn't actually climb any higher, and so the game had to change. I began to concentrate on the speed, and in the end, I could reach my highest branch in 25 seconds. I got too confident, and one afternoon I tried to step from branch to branch before I had firmly grasped onto the next one. I fell about 20 feet and broke my arm really bad in 2 places. My mom was running toward me yelling, and I remember her sounding like she was underwater. I don't even remember what she said, but I do remember being surprised at just how white my bone was. I was going to start kindergarten with a cast and wouldn't even have any friends to sign it. My mom must have felt terrible because the day before I started school, she brought home a kitten. He was just a baby, and he was striped with tan and white. As soon as she put him down, he crawled into an empty case of soda that was sitting on the floor. So I named him Boxes. Boxes was only an outside cat when he escaped. My mom had him declawed so he wouldn't destroy any of the furniture, so as a result, we did our best to keep him inside. He'd get out every now and then, and we'd find him somewhere in the backyard chasing some kind of bug or lizard, though he could hardly ever catch one because he had no front claws. He was pretty evasive, but we'd always catch him and carry him back inside. He'd scramble to look back over my shoulder. I told my mom that it was because he was planning for his strategy for the next time. Once inside, we'd give him some tuna fish, and he had come to learn the sound of a can opener as a signal. He'd come running whenever he heard it. This conditioning came in handy later because toward the end of our time in that house, Boxes would get out much more frequent, and he would run under the house into a crawl space where neither of us wanted to follow because it was cramped and probably crawling with bugs and rodents. Ingenuously, my mom thought to hook the can opener to an extension cord out back and run it right beside the hole that Box had gone through. Eventually, he would emerge with his loud meows, looking excited by the sound and then horrified at how we could run such a cruel ruse on him. A can opener with no tuna made no sense to Boxes. The last time he escaped to under the house was actually our last day in it. My mom had put up the house on the market and we had begun packing our things. We didn't have much and we stretched the packing out a while, though I had already packed all of my clothes at my mom's request. My mom could tell I was really sad about moving and wanted the transition to be smooth for me. And I guess she thought that having my clothes in a box would reinforce the idea that we were moving, but things wouldn't change that much. When Boxes got out, as we were loading some things into our moving van, my mom cursed because she had already packed the can opener and wasn't sure where it was. I pretended to go look for it so I wouldn't have to go into the house, and my mom, probably completely aware of this little scam, moved one of the panels and crawled in. She came out with Boxes pretty quickly and seemed pretty unnerved, which made me feel even better about getting out of it. My mom made some phone calls while I packed a little more, and then she came into my room and told me that she had spoken with a realtor and were going to start moving into the other house that day. She said it was excellent news, but I had thought we had more time in the house. She originally said that we weren't moving until the end of the next week, and it was only Tuesday. What's more, we weren't completely finished packing, but my mom said sometimes it was just easier to replace things than pack them and haul them all over the city. I didn't even get to grab the rest of my box clothes. I asked if I could call Josh to say bye, but she said that we could just call him from our new house. We then left in the moving van. I managed to stay in touch with Josh for years, which is surprising since we no longer went to the same school. Our parents weren't close friends, but they knew that we were, so they would accommodate our desire to see one another by driving us back and forth for sleepovers, sometimes every weekend. For Christmas one year, our parents even pooled their money and got us some really nice walkie-talkies that were advertised to work across a range that extended past the distance between our houses. They also had batteries that could last for days if the walkie-talkie was on, but not used. They would only occasionally work well enough that we could talk across the city, but when we stayed over, we'd use them around the house, talking in mock radio speak that we had taken from movies, and they worked great for that. Thanks to our parents, we were still friends when we were 10. One weekend, I was staying over at Josh's, and my mom called me to say goodnight. She was still pretty watchful, even though she couldn't actually watch me, but I had gotten so used to it that I didn't even notice, even if Josh did. She sounded upset. Boxes was missing. This must have been a Saturday night because I had spent the night at Josh's the previous night and was going to go home the next day because we had school on Monday. Boxes had been missing since Friday afternoon. I gathered that she had just not seen him since returning home after dropping me off. She must have decided not to tell me he was missing because if he didn't come home before I did, then I would be devastated at not only his absence, she could have kept that from me. She told me not to worry. He'll come back. He always does. But Boxes never came back. 3 weekends later, I stayed at Josh's again. I was still upset about Boxes, but my mom told me that there had been many times when pets had disappeared from homes for weeks or even months, only to return to their home. She said that they always knew where home was and would always try to get back. I was explaining this to Josh when a thought hit me so hard that I interrupted my own sentence just to say it aloud. What if Boxes is at the wrong home? Josh was confused. What? He lives with you. He knows where his home is. But he grew up somewhere else, Josh. He was raised in my old house, a couple of neighborhoods away. Maybe he still thinks of that place as home, like I do. Oh, I get it. Well, that'll be great. We'll tell my dad tomorrow and he'll take us over there so we can look. No, he won't, man. My mom said that we could never go back to that place because the new owners wouldn't want to be bothered. She said that she told your mom and your dad the same thing. Josh persisted. Okay, well then we'll just go out exploring tomorrow and make our way to your old house. No, man, if I get spotted, your dad will find out, and so will my mom. We have to go there ourselves. We have to go there tonight. It didn't take that much convincing to get Josh on board, since he was usually the one that came up with ideas like this anyways. But we had never snuck out of the house before. It actually turned out to be incredibly easy. The window in his room opened up to the backyard, and he had a latched wooden fence that wasn't even locked. After those 2 minor hurdles, we slipped off into the night, flashlight and walkies in hand. There were 2 ways to get from Josh's house to my old house. We could walk on the street and make all the turns, or go through the woods, which would be about half the time. It would have taken about 2 hours to walk there taking the street, but I suggested that we go that way anyways. I told him that it was because I didn't want to get lost. Josh refused and said that if we were seen, they might recognize him and tell his dad. He threatened to go home if we didn't take the shortcut, and I just accepted because I didn't want to go by myself. Josh didn't know about the last time I walked through these woods at night. The woods were much less creepy with a friend and a flashlight, and we're making pretty good time. I wasn't entirely sure where we were, but Josh seemed confident enough, and that bolstered my morale. We passed through a particularly thick patch of tangled trees, and a strap on my walkie-talkie got caught in a branch. Josh had the flashlight, so I was struggling to get the walkie-talkie free when I heard Josh say, "Hey man, want to go for a swim?" I looked over to where he was shining the flashlight, though I closed my eyes as I did because I now knew where we were. He was pointing to the pool float. This was where I had woken up in the woods all those years ago. I felt a lump in my throat and a sting of fresh tears in my eyes as I continued to struggle with the walkie. Frustrated, I yanked on it hard enough to break it free, and I turned to walk to Josh, who had partially laid down on the pool flat in a mocking sunbathing pose. As I walked toward him, I stumbled and nearly fell onto a fairly large hole that was sitting in the middle of a small clearing, but I regained my balance and stopped right at its edge. It was deep. I was surprised by the size of the hole, but more surprised by the fact that I did not remember it. I realized it must not have been there that night because it was in the same spot where I had awoken. I put it out of my mind and turned to Josh. "Quit messing around, man. You saw I was stuck over there and you were just laying here joking around on this float." I punctuated the sentence with a kick to an exposed part of the float. A screeching rose from it. Josh's smile inverted. He suddenly looked terrified and was struggling to get off the float, but he couldn't in a quick manner due to the awkward way he had been laying on it. Each time he would fall back on the float, the screeching would intensify. I wanted to help Josh, but I couldn't move myself any closer. My legs couldn't cooperate. I hated these woods. We quickened our pace and made it out of the woods faster than we thought we would, and we found ourselves back in my old neighborhood. The last time I had rounded the bend ahead, I had seen my house fully illuminated, and all the memories of what transpired came flooding back. I felt a skipping in my heart, and we were finally turning the corner and about to face a full view of my house. But this time, all the lights were off. From a distance, I could see my old climbing tree, and as my mind traced the steps of casualty backward, I realized that I wouldn't be back here this night if that tree hadn't grown. And I was briefly in awe of how all events were like that. As we got closer, I could see that the lawn looked terrible. I couldn't even guess when it had been last mowed. One of the shutters had partially broken loose, and it was rocking back and forth in the breeze, and overall the house just looked dirty. I was so sad to see my old home in such a state of despair. Why would my mom care if we bothered the new owners if they cared so little about their house they lived in? Then I realized there were no new owners. The house had been abandoned, though it looked simply forsaken. Why would my mom lie to me about our house having new people in it? But I thought that it was actually a good thing. It would be easier to look around for boxes if we didn't have to worry about being spotted by the new family. This would make it much quicker. Josh interrupted my thoughts as we walked through the gate and up to the house itself. "Your old house looks sick, dude," Josh yelled as quietly as he could. "Shut up, Josh. Even like this, it's still nicer than your house." "Hey, man." Okay. I think boxes is probably under the house. One of us has to go under and look, but the other should stay next to the opening in case he comes running out." "Are you serious? There's no way I'm going under there. It's your cat, man. You do it." "Look, I'll game you for it, unless you're too scared," I said, holding my fist over my upturned palm. "Fine, but we go on shoot, not on 3. It's rock, paper, scissors, shoot, not 1, 2, 3. "I know how to play the game, Josh. You're the one who's always messing it up. And it's 2 out of 3. I lost. I wiggled loose the panel that my mom would always move when she had to crawl under there for boxes. She had only had to do it a couple of times since the can opener trick usually worked. But when she had to do it, she hated it, especially last time. And as I looked into the darkness of the crawl space, I had a greater appreciation for why. Before we moved, she said that it was actually better that boxes ran under there, despite how hard it could be to get him out. It was less dangerous than him jumping over the fence and running around the neighborhood. And that was true, but I was still dreading doing this. I grabbed the flashlight and the walkie-talkie and began to crawl. A powerful smell overtook me. It smelled like death. I turned on my walkie-talkie. Josh, are you there? This is Macho Man. Come back. Josh, cut to it. There's something wrong down here. What do you mean? It stinks. It smells like something died. Is it boxes? I really hope not. I set down the walkie and moved the flashlight around as I crawled forward. Looking through the hole from the outside, you could see all the way back with the right lighting, but you had to be inside to see around the support blocks that held up the house. I'd say that there was about 40% of the area that you couldn't see unless you were actually in the crawl space. Even inside, I discovered that I could only see directly where the flashlight was pointing. I realized that this would make scouting around the place much more difficult. As I moved forward, the smell intensified. The fear was growing in me that boxes had come here and something had happened to him. I shined the flashlight around but couldn't see much of anything. I wrapped my fingers around the support block to pull myself forward, and as I did, I felt something that made my hand recoil. Fur. My heart sank, and I prepared myself emotionally for what I was about to see. I crawled slowly so I could prolong what I knew was coming and inched my eyes and the flashlight past the block to see what was on the other side. I staggered back and forth, Jesus Christ, escaping my trembling mouth. It was a hideous and twisted creature, badly decomposed. Its skin had rotted away on its face, so the teeth appeared to be enormous, and the smell was unbearable. What is it? Are you okay? Is it boxes? I reached out on the walkie-talkie. No, it's not boxes. What the hell is it then? I don't know. I shined the light on it again and looked at it with less fear in my vision. I chuckled. It's a raccoon. Well, keep looking. I'm going to go into the house to see if he might have made it in there somehow. What? No, Josh, don't go in there. What if Boxes is down here and runs out? He can't. I put the board back. I looked and saw that he was telling the truth. Why'd you do that? Josh said, Don't worry, man. You can move it easy. If Boxes ran out and I missed him, then he'd be gone. If he's down there, then grab him tight and I'll come move the board. And if he's not, then you can move it yourself while I look in the house. Some of his points were good, and I doubted he'd be able to get in anyway. Okay, but be careful and don't touch anything. There's a bunch of my old clothes still in the box in my room. If you can look in there to see if he crawled in one, make sure you bring your walkie. Roger that, good buddy. I realized that it would be pitch black in there. The power would have been turned off since no one was paying the bill. With any luck, he'd be able to see from the street lights that might cast some light inside. Otherwise, I'm not sure what he'd do. Before too long, I heard footsteps right over my head and felt old dirt raining down on me. Josh, is that you? Shh, breaker, this is Macho Man coming back from the big old Tango Foxtrot. The eagle has landed. What's your 20, Princess Jasmine? Over. Asshole. Macho Man, my 20 is in your bathroom, looking at your stash of magazines. Look like you've got a thing for dudes' butts. What's your report? Over. I could hear him laughing without the walkie, and I started laughing too. I heard the footsteps fade away a little. He was on his way to my room. Man, it's dark in here. Hey, are you sure you had a box of clothes in here? I don't see any. Yeah, there should be a couple boxes in front of the closet there. Well, there aren't any boxes in here, so let me check inside the closet to see if you left any clothes there. I started thinking that maybe my mom had come back and gotten the clothes and had just given them away because I had outgrown a lot of them. But I remember leaving the boxes there. I didn't even have time to close the last one up before we left. While I was waiting for Josh to tell me what he had found, I kicked out my leg, which had started falling asleep because of the position I was in, and it hit something. I looked back and saw something really strange. It was a blanket, and all around it were bowls. I crawled a little closer to it. The blanket smelled moldy, and most of the bowls were empty, but one had something in it, and I recognized cat food. It was a different kind than we had given to Boxes, but I suddenly understood my mom had set up a little place for Boxes to encourage him to come here instead of running around the neighborhood. That made a lot of sense, and it seemed even more likely that Boxes would have come back to this place. That's so cool, Mom, I thought. I found your clothes. Oh, cool. Where were the boxes? Like I said, there are no boxes. Your clothes are in your closet. They're just hanging up. I felt a chill. This was impossible. I had packed all my clothes. Even though we weren't supposed to move for another 2 weeks when we left, I remember packing them and thinking that this was stupid for me to have to get clothes out of a box and put them back in. But I had packed them, but someone had hung them back up. Why? Josh needed to get out of there. That can't be right, Josh. They're supposed to be in boxes. Stop messing around and just come back outside. No joke, man. I'm looking at them. Maybe you just thought that you left them. Haha, wow, you sure like to look at yourself, don't you? What do you mean? Why? Your walls, man. Your walls are covered in Polaroids of yourself. There are hundreds of them. What, did you hire someone to... Silence. I checked my walkie to see if I had switched it off somehow. It was fine. I could hear footsteps, but couldn't tell exactly where Josh was going. I waited for Josh to finish his sentence, thinking that his finger had just slipped off the button, but he did not continue. He seemed to be stomping around the house now. I was just about to radio him back when he came back. There's someone in the house. His voice was hushed and broken. I could hear he was on the verge of tears. I wanted to respond, but how loud was his walkie-talkie turned up? What if the other person had heard it? I said nothing and just waited and listened. What I heard were footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, and then a loud thud. Oh God, Josh. He had been found. I was sure of it. The person had found him and was hurting him. I broke out into tears. He was my only friend next to Boxes. And then I realized, what if Josh told him I was under the house? What could I possibly do? As I struggled to compose myself, I thankfully heard Josh's voice through the walkie. He's got something, man. It's a big bag. He just threw it on the floor. And oh my God, man, the bag. I think it just moved. I was paralyzed. I wanted to run home. I wanted to save Josh. I wanted to go for help. I wanted many things, but I just lay there, frozen. As I lay unable to move my eyes, focused on the corner of my house, my breath hitched at what I saw. Animals. Dozens of them. All of them dead. They lay in piles all around the perimeter of the crawl space. Is this what the cat food was for? Seeing this broke my shock as I knew I had to get out of there, and I scrambled to the board. I pushed on it, but it wouldn't budge. I couldn't move it because it was wedged in there, and I couldn't get my fingers around it since the edges were outside. I was trapped. God damn it, you, Josh. I whispered to myself. I could feel thunderous footsteps above me. The house was shaking. I heard Josh scream, and it was matched by another scream that wasn't full of fear. As I continued pushing, I felt the board move. But I knew it wasn't me who was moving it. I could hear the footsteps above me and in front of me, and shouting and screaming, filling the brief silences between the footsteps. I moved back and held my walkie, ready to try and defend myself, and the board was thrown to the side and an arm shot in and grabbed for me. Let's go, man, now. It was Josh. Thank God. I scrambled out of the opening, holding the flashlight and the walkie. When we got to the fence, we both jumped it, but Josh's walkie fell. He reached for it, and I told him to forget it. We had to move. Behind us, I could hear yelling, though they weren't words, only sounds, and we, perhaps foolishly, ran for the woods to get back to Josh's quicker and to be somewhat harder to follow. The whole way through the woods, Josh just kept yelling, "My picture! He took my picture!" But I knew the man already had Josh's picture. From all those years ago at the ditch, I suppose Josh was still thought. But I knew the man already had Josh's picture. From all those years ago at the ditch, I supposed Josh still thought those mechanical sounds were from a robot. We made it back to Josh's house and back into his room before his parents woke up. I asked him about the big bag and if it really moved, and he said he couldn't be sure. He kept apologizing about dropping the walkie at the house, but obviously that wasn't a big deal. We didn't go to sleep and sat peering out the window waiting for him. I went home later that day as it was already about 3 a.m. I told my mom the basics of the story a couple days ago. She broke down and was furious about the danger I put myself in. I asked her why she made all of those things up about bothering the new owners and stopping me from going. Why did she think the house was so dangerous? She became irate and hysterical, but she answered my question. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it harder than I could have ever thought she was capable of, and locked her eyes to mine, whispering as if she was afraid of being overheard. Because I never put any fucking blankets or bowls under the house for Boxes. You weren't the only one to find them. I felt dizzy. I understood so much now. I understood why she looked so uneasy after she brought Boxes out from under the house on our last day there. She found more than spiders or a rat's nest that day. I understood why we left almost 2 weeks early. I understood why she tried to stop me from going. She knew. She knew he made his house under ours, and she kept it from me. I left without saying another word and didn't finish the story for her. But I want to finish it here for you. I got home from Josh's that day. I threw my stuff on the floor and it scattered everywhere. I didn't care, I just wanted to sleep. I woke up around 9 p.m. to the sound of Boxes meowing. My heart leapt. I was a little sick about the fact that if I had just waited a day, none of the previous night's events would have happened and I'd just have Box anyways. But that didn't matter, he was back. I got off my bed and called for him, looking around to catch a glint of light off his eyes. The crying continued and I followed it. It was coming from under the bed. I laughed a little, thinking I had just crawled under a house looking for him, and now this was so much better. His meows were being muffled by a shirt, so I flung it aside and smiled. Welcome home, Boxes. His cries were coming from my walkie-talkie. Boxes never came home. Well, you guys, that is just part 3 to a long series of No Sleep that I would love to continue for you. If you're not spooked out already by that, then you definitely need to tune in for the remaining stories because these just get crazier and crazier. But if you like this week's episode, then give me a like and let me know in the comments down below if you're interested in hearing the remaining stories. If you aren't already, you can follow me at Mostly Crime with Mai on Instagram. If you don't subscribe to my channel already, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you can get notified every time I post new videos. But I will warn you that these videos are just going to get creepier and creepier as time goes on. So before you hit that subscribe button, beware.